we're able to reduce to level 2, we've got a building next door that we can use, and that'll be converted into the new food bank, because there's no way for the foreseeable future we're going to drop down to 15 a week.
How did you get involved in all of this?
It's part of what I do. It's part of just who I am as a minister and as a Christian. You just want to put yourself wherever you can to meet needs. But over the years, we've built up a great relationship with the previous owner, Sarah Ashby, who ran the food bank, and she wanted to retire. She'd done it for 25, 30 years, and she wanted to give it to somebody who she felt shared her values, and so we got it about 18 months ago, and it's unrecognisable now purely because of what's out in front of us. So we've been in it for about 18 months, but we're not going anywhere. We realise this is a long haul, and we've got the capacity to deliver for quite some time.
Well, it's nice to have you on. Pastor Terry Bradley there, helping out the residents of Tikawiti there. And it's just a testament, isn't it, Leonie, to the people across the country who, in their own special way, are volunteering, doing great work, doing great service for the local area.
Yeah, and I think Terry is just a great example of one of those unsung heroes. And I know we have many volunteers in our communities that are doing some amazing things during this time. And I just encourage those who can and have the ability to support them either monetary or financially, because we keep talking about it, but we are all in this together, and we're only going to come through this together. And people are increasingly under stress and need some help. And sometimes when we are in tough times, the philanthropic side, because people's incomes have dropped, sometimes that dries up as well. And this is the time we as a country need to, be a team of 5 million and come together.
What do you reckon, Russell?
I think welfare is principally the responsibility of the government, but it is so important that people are doing what Terry and the other people involved with us are doing. A community response is always valuable, and when it involves actually keeping people fed, it's even more valuable.
And just on a side note, when the lockdown relaxes or we go to level 3, Russell, what are your thoughts around, because many of us have friends, colleagues, people who've started their own little businesses are really struggling. Are you going to save your money? Are you going to sort of support them by spending a bit? What are you going to do?
Well, I'm actually hoping that my son, who was working up the back at Koutou on K Road, might be able to go back into work. They took the wage subsidy, so he's kept employed, which is awesome. He's autistic, and that's a big part of his identity. But yeah, I think businesses I think there are signs that people are going to think about how much they value the small businesses around them. And look, takeaways, I'm looking forward to them as much as anyone else, but I will be getting them from local businesses. And I think that matters a lot. Yeah,
what do you think on that, Leon? It's a good sentiment?
Yeah, and I suppose I've been in the position where I've heard from a lot of small tenants, say retailers and also small landlords, and all I know is there is huge amounts of stress and people are worried, particularly for the small to medium-sized businesses. So all I can do is, when people can, encourage and support local.
Good on you, Leonie Freeman.
We don't want them all going.
And Russell Brown. Leonie Freeman, Russell Brown on the panel. Have a great long weekend. Have a wonderful Anzac commemoration tomorrow morning. Stand at dawn. See you Tuesday.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere Akine, the Deputy PM, reckons creating a trans-Tasman travel bubble could save businesses. We're down to fewer than 10 new COVID-19 cases a day, so what does that actually mean? The great countdown come down, staff lose their 10% bonus as we move out of lockdown. Why when business is booming? There's calls for more fruit shops to open under level 3 to provide competition to the big players. Air New Zealand takes the scalpel to more long-haul services to keep airborne. The Anzac Day Dawn service will be at your letterbox this year. In UK, volunteers are injected with a potential coronavirus vaccine. And the Otara volunteers putting food on table and smiles on dials.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Me ngā pitu kōrero ko Anna Thomas tēnei. The government is offering up more support to workers as the number of people applying for benefits continues to soar. Close to 30,000 additional people have ended up on the job seekers benefit from March the 20th. Here's our political reporter Charlie Drever.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says he recognises it is a distressing time for those people now without work.
We have to bear in mind, though, that this represents less than 1% of our total population and is dwarfed by the 1.6 million people who are being supported by the wage subsidy scheme.
Grant Robertson says the government will continue to work with businesses to keep people in jobs. For those employed but still unable to work, the Leave Support Scheme has been expanded to cover all businesses. And to make sure businesses receiving the wage subsidy aren't misusing the funding, Mr Robertson says 2,400 audits have been completed by MSD.
We owe it to those workers and employers to make sure their good work isn't undermined by anyone abusing the scheme. We also have a duty to all New Zealanders to ensure taxpayer money is going where it is intended to support the economy.
So far, $17 million is set to be refunded back to the government, $1 million of which are from businesses who have been audited. Meanwhile, the number of new cases of COVID-19 has remained low at 5, but there has been an additional death of a man in his 60s from Christchurch's Rosewood Rest Home. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says opening up a trans-Tasman travel bubble with Australia could be a lifeline for some businesses. As the government looks to recover from the economic blow that lockdown has caused, Mr Peters says New Zealand has to think outside the square. Restrictions on Australians have varied from state to state, and on that basis, Mr Peters says he's not opposed to initially relaxing the borders to the eastern border or those states that have better health outcomes. He says he's working hard on a plan.
Well, my officials are talking to the Australian officials about it. How much wider it is outside of that portfolio, I can't describe, but at least we've taken the concept from last week and put some work into it.
Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters. An aviation commentator says it'll be years before travel to the United States picks up again. Air New Zealand has today confirmed it will not resume its suspended Auckland to Buenos Aires and Los Angeles to London routes because of the impact of COVID-19. It has also postponed the launch of its non-stop Auckland to New York service until late next year at the earliest. Aviation writer Peter Clark says that's no real surprise.
Tourism out of that eastern side of the United States is definitely not going to happen. Tourists here will probably need years before they feel safe going back to that part of the world. I understand Air New Zealand putting that off. It was expected.
Peter Clark. And Air New Zealand says it's deeply disappointed and will review the resumption of services case by case. People are being urged not to relax alert level 4 restrictions over Anzac weekend. The country will move to level 3 at 11:59 p.m. on Monday, but police say they will continue to enforce the current restrictions until then. They say officers will be visible on the roads with checkpoints operating at holiday hotspots. The Civil Aviation Authority is to investigate a fatal plane crash in Wairarapa this morning. The light aircraft was top-dressing a farm near Carterton when it crashed into a gully below the airstrip shortly after takeoff in near-perfect conditions. Harriet Robinson reports.
The man, who is in his 50s, has been described by his employer as an experienced and dedicated pilot. The flight had just taken off and begun fertilising the farm near Ruakiwi Road when it came down. Emergency services were alerted to the crash at 7:30, but the man was pronounced dead on arrival. His employer, Aerowork, says their close-knit team are in shock after losing a hugely valued colleague. The company paid tribute to the important and often invisible role of top-dressing pilots. The death will be referred to the coroner. This is Harriet Robinson.
New research prompted by the Trump administration suggests sunlight can be a powerful weapon against COVID-19. The BBC's John Sopel reports from the US.
There's been speculation that sunlight and heat might limit the life of the coronavirus. The White House presented research conducted by Department of Homeland Security scientists that appears to back that up. They found that solar light and humidity had a powerful effect on killing the virus, both on surfaces and in the air. There was also discussion about how quickly disinfectants killed the virus, and that led to a slightly outlandish moment when President Trump wondered aloud whether people suffering from COVID-19 could be given disinfectant, maybe injected as a purifying treatment, an idea quickly dismissed by his scientists.
John Sopel reporting. And the coordinator of America's COVID-19 task force, Deborah Burke, says heat and light are not realistic forms of treatment. In sport, the chairman of Rugby Australia is adding his weight to the support being provided to the organisation's departed chief executive, Raelene Castle. The New Zealander and former head of Netball New Zealand has resigned amid criticism of her handling of the governing body's financial struggles. Rugby Australia chairman Paul McLean says Castle made tough decisions during her almost 3 years in the job, adding she had copped vile criticism from faceless people. Earlier, New Zealand Rugby said Castle's departure was an unselfish act. The country's top netballers have taken a month-long 20% pay cut, which will be reviewed early next month. The pay cut applies to the retainers for all Silver Ferns and ANZ Premiership players and runs from April the 10th through to May the 7th. Netball New Zealand High Performance Manager Keir Hansen says any decision about ongoing pay cuts will be made in consultation with the Players Association. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, a special Anzac virtual dawn service to remember the sacrifice of others in service of our country. Wherever your bubble is, stand with us and take a moment to remember our fallen during the dawn service, which includes the last post, 1 minute silence, and a special Anzac address by the Defence and Veterans Minister, Ron Mark. Our standard dawn service, hosted by Shannon Honui-Thompson, starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow, with coverage starting from 10 to 6 on RNZ National.
And now, looking at the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Generally fine, with some areas of morning fog tomorrow. Taranaki to Kapiti, also Taihape, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow and isolated showers about the ranges. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Remaining showers about northern Gisborne, clearing this evening. Buller and Westland, mainly fine with isolated showers today. Rain for a time tomorrow morning or afternoon. Otago and Southland, excluding Stewart Island, fine today. Periods of rain tomorrow morning with just a few spots for eastern Otago, then becoming fine from the afternoon. Stewart Island and Fiordland, isolated showers, rain developing tonight, then clearing late tomorrow morning and becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. RNZ National. It is 5:08. More news at 5:30.
And welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Supermarkets' love affair with their staff appears to be ending along with Level 4. Countdown and Foodstuffs workers who were promised a 10% pay bonus for their frontline duties during lockdown will lose it next week. Not that they've seen any extra money yet. Checkpoint sources tell us the extra money isn't likely to hit pay packets until the end of May. Now there's a chorus of voices among workers and shoppers who'd like to see it continue. Katie Todd filed this report.
They're anxious, they're exhausted, and now they're feeling let down by their employers. That's how First Union Secretary for Retail, Finance and Commerce, Tali Williams, describes the sentiment among supermarket workers as they approach the end of a stint on higher pay. She says it's surprising neither Foodstuffs or Countdown wanted to continue the pay bonus.
These workers are really holding the country together at the moment, and it's a really stressful time for them. We think in the very least that they should be acknowledged and valued by their employer.
That message echoed in hundreds of social media posts, some even suggesting strikes and petitions to keep supermarket staff on higher wages. But outside a Pack and Save in Auckland, these shoppers aren't so sure if it's a good idea.
No, I don't. I think most other industries have actually taken big pay cuts. I'm working full-time. In fact, I'm busier than I've ever been. My missus is actually busier than she's ever been, and we've both taken large pay cuts to keep our businesses going and ticking over. They're in an industry that's actually surviving quite nicely, and they've got jobs. I'd be more concerned about sharing that money around with people that have lost their jobs, to be honest.
I think that's a very tough question. Labour rates are going to go down across the board. I've been working through Level 4. I work for an essential service provider as well. Yeah, we won't be getting any pay increases.
I know everybody likes to be paid more, but it was an extraordinary situation.
Foodstuffs and Countdown both declined interview requests today. But in a statement, Countdown said the bonus had been put in place partly to recognise the huge demand on supermarkets which staff dealt with in the weeks before the lockdown. Since then, it said it's put in place measures to make a more controlled environment for staff.
And thankfully, we've also seen demand from customers calm down. This, along with the recruitment of around 2,000 new team members, has helped get our business back into a more normal and less stressful rhythm.
Foodstuffs notes it did extend the bonus by a week, when Level 4 was extended a week.
As the country moves out of Alert Level 4, it makes sense that wages return to normal and owners' usual business processes pick up again, including undertaking employee pay reviews and rewarding their teams independently for their hard work.
Supermarket workers declined to comment to RNZ directly, as they're advised in their contracts not to speak to media. But in anonymous statements, some said the 10% pay rise had really helped them after their total household incomes took a hit, and they're worried that pressure won't necessarily go away when restrictions ease. Others said they had never expected the 10% pay rise to be extended, so it wasn't a disappointment. And still others said they didn't know about the pay rise until today, with their managers now promising to back pay them the extra wages in a lump sum. Meanwhile, First Union is trying to drum up public support to pressure the supermarket chains into continuing a pay rise. Tali Williams wants customers to put their heart on their sleeves or in their trolleys.
We're asking people to either wear a heart when they go to the supermarket, or alternatively, they can take a photo of themselves wearing a heart and post that online and encourage their family and friends to. The hashtag is Show Some Heart.
Countdown says it's continuing an increased food discount of 10% for staff, and Foodstuffs says supporting its people remains a priority during the journey back to business as usual. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
And staff have confirmed to Checkpoint this afternoon they have not been paid the 10% bonus and won't receive it until the end of May. Staff have told us the decision to stop the 10% bonus is offensive and they feel disheartened after putting themselves and their families at risk for their employer. Countdown's Corporate Affairs General Manager, Kiri Hannafin, has declined to be interviewed. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says some businesses could be saved if the country creates a trans-Tasman bubble, and he's open to starting on a state-by-state basis. Australia has had similar success to New Zealand in keeping the number of COVID-19 cases relatively low, although across the ditch, hospitalisation rates are much higher. The restrictions on Australians have varied too, with some states operating a stricter regime than others. As the government looks to recover from the economic blow that lockdown has caused, Mr Peters says New Zealand has to think outside of the square. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has this story.
55% of tourists who visit New Zealand come from Australia, and for that reason, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister, Winston Peters, says it makes sense to start planning how a trans-Tasman travel bubble might work.
Areas that are being written off now may not be written off if we're thinking outside the square, so to speak, thinking laterally and looking at how we can organise, admittedly at a limited level, the same activity. So it requires us to put our best minds together both here in Australia. I've spoken to the Foreign Minister of Australia about the need for us to start thinking about that now.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is on board and says it makes sense to work with New Zealand on any relaxing of the border restrictions.
Now, if there is any country in the world with whom we can reconnect with first, undoubtedly that's New Zealand. And we have similar trajectories. Their restrictions have been far greater. Our case response has, been the same, if not better than New Zealand. So if there's any country where we can look to achieve that, then I would have thought New Zealand would be the obvious candidate. And that's the nature of the discussions we've had.
Mr Morrison says he speaks weekly with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and the idea is something that has been worked through patiently. Winston Peters says a strict regime at the border would be needed to ensure public safety, and he wouldn't expect the border to open until both countries were at the point that a 14-day quarantine on arrival was no longer needed. While the focus is getting tourists flowing between New Zealand and all of Australia, Mr Peters says he's not opposed to initially opening up to the Australian eastern border.
Open to both options in my thinking, but the more limited option will lead to the wider option in time and more quickly than we think.
Winston Peters says a state-by-state basis is also a possibility, and when the whole country is ready, New Zealand needs to be too.
But it's more than likely they will come together, and sooner rather than later, and when they do, we should be prepared for them.
He says he's working hard on a plan after both he and Mr Morrison raised the issue separately.
Well, my officials are talking to the Australian officials about it. How much wider it is outside of that portfolio, I can't describe. But at least we've taken the concept from last week and put some work into it.
Earlier this week, when asked about the potential for a trans-Tasman bubble, Jacinda Ardern said the conversation with Mr Morrison was a way off and that opening the borders could potentially set off a chain of devastating events. In a statement from her office today, she said while nothing is going to happen immediately, the idea has merit, but it would be further down the track. Finance Minister Grant Robertson stood in for Ms Ardern at today's daily press conference and reiterated that it was a talking point for later on.
The good news is that both New Zealand and Australia are doing well in terms of fighting the virus, and so sometime in the future it may be possible, but I don't think people should get ahead of themselves. Those discussions are at an early level.
Asked about the idea of a state-by-state relaxing of the borders, he didn't rule it out.
Look, I think we'd have to work that through. Clearly in Australia there are different responses in different states, but it is very important for us that we continue to maintain the integrity of our border.
While Australia is the only country New Zealand is directly talking to about border controls, Winston Peters says depending on how elimination goes, there may be an opportunity to create other international bubbles. He says the government is already talking with Singapore about increased trade and medical supply access. And if health results meet the right standard, then China could too be an option. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. For each of the past 6 days, the number of new coronavirus cases has slowed to fewer than 10. That's down from a daily peak in the high 80s after more than 4 weeks lockdown in our bubbles. Today's numbers, 5 new confirmed or probable cases, bringing New Zealand's total to 1,456. And sadly, there's been another death. Te Pūnaha Matatini, the Centre for Research Excellence, modelled the worst-case scenario for COVID-19. Left unchecked, it predicted the virus would eventually infect 89% of New Zealand's population and kill up to 80,000 people. So what do these latest figures tell us? Cause for celebration or concern still? Auckland University Professor Sean Hendy led the research team and joins us now via Skype. Evening, Sean. Can I just start off with Winston Peters looking at this idea of an extended bubble across the ditch with Australia? Looking at their figures and our figures, is that a conceivable option?
No, I think it is. Australia is on a similar path to us. Like us, they moved relatively quickly. They were a bit further ahead in the epidemic perhaps than us, but their measures seem to have been quite effective. So if both countries track towards elimination, then that's something we might be able to look to do. I mean, I'd be cautious about opening up the borders as a floodgate. I'd want to sort of see it phased in slowly, perhaps having family members reconnected who've been separated across the Tasman by the lockdowns, and then maybe eventually looking to more widespread travel. But it's something we want to be cautious about, but certainly it's a possibility.
What would you need for that to happen? So would both countries need to have a reproduction rate or the spread rate under 1 in order for you to do that? The infection rate to one person?
Yeah, we have to keep it under 1 for quite a long period of time. We really have to get those numbers down to just handfuls of cases that are, below those that we're seeing at the moment. I mean, it's very encouraging what we're seeing at the moment, and we've got a very low R0 number, but we need to keep that in place and keep that low for the, next couple of months, and really be sure that we've not got undetected spread out there in parts of the country, or likewise in parts of Australia. I mean, we've seen Singapore recently. It looked like it was tracking very well. It was one of the early countries that we followed and were looking to, and they've had a second wave come back. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of immunity to this disease, even with the cases we've had. So the possibility of reinvasion of the disease is very strong.
So where are we at the moment in terms of the spread? So if a person is infected, how many other people are they on average infecting at the moment?
At the moment, it's less than a half. So that's what you need to eliminate. You need to keep it down. I mean, we look at this every week. Last week we were at
Sorry to interrupt, but under 0.5, does that, for all intents and purposes, equal elimination?
Only if you keep it in place for long enough. It's telling you that you're slowing the spread of the disease down, and eventually, if you keep that number that low for another few weeks, then we'll actually, we'll be very close to elimination.
At what point would you be comfortable calling it elimination? 1 month at that level, 2 months, or when?
This is something that the epidemiologists debate, is what exactly does elimination mean? I mean, I'd be comfortable personally from our modelling point of view that if we see a number of days with no cases, and that sort of thing, we might start to see that in a few weeks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Given you're looking at modelling in numbers, what is your prediction for when we will get to the first day with 0 cases? Can you give us a rough idea?
It's a little bit hard for us to predict that at the moment because we don't know how well level 3 is going to work. I mean, one of the things that we were concerned about was Anzac weekend. If we'd come off level 3 going into Anzac weekend and everybody just sort of headed out to see their friends, to the beach, then that could have reignited the spread of the disease. So we've got to really wait and see for a little while, 10 days, or so, a week to 10 days into level 3 before we'll start to get an idea of how well level 3 is working, and then we'll be able to make a call about when elimination might be likely.
Can you explain to me, watching this, clusters, some of our biggest clusters are still growing. How can that be when we've been locked down for more than a month?
Yeah, well, part of this is to do with contact tracing and testing. So people are still working through and identifying some of these cases. So the disease takes a while to incubate, and then symptoms come on a little bit later. So it can take a while to close the envelope around those clusters, and I think that's what we're seeing going on.
So it could be both a lag in identification and a lag in contact tracing. It could be both of those factors.
Yeah. I think those things that there are some clusters that have taken a long time for them to track down, and of course as that bubble expands out, as you go out further and further into the cluster, you've got to talk to more and more people. So it can take a long time to really draw a circle around the cluster. One of the reasons we've better do that, one of the reasons we're seeing quite large clusters is because we've brought the numbers down, and that's given time for our contact tracers to actually go out and do that. In other countries around the world, their contact tracing has just been overwhelmed by the number of cases. And so that's why perhaps our clusters look large, perhaps compared to some of those that have been identified in other parts of the world.
If we're at 0.5 in terms of spread rate, where would you get uncomfortable in level 3? Where would you think that we need to be going back to level 4? What number would have you saying, nah, we've got to go back to lockdown?
I think if we start getting back into double digits in a couple of weeks' time, that'll be a suggestion to us. I mean, we're talking about very small numbers, so they will
When
fluctuate.
You say double digits, do you mean the number of new cases coming through?
The number of new cases that we identify per day. So that would start to give us some alarm, and then I think we'd have to start having a discussion about, and it'll depend on the type of cases. It could be a cluster that we discovered that was relatively well defined and that we were confident that we had ring fenced. But if we started to see sort of double digits of community transmission cases we couldn't tie into one another, then we'd start to be quite alarmed. And I think we'd have to restart the conversation about level 4.
Just quickly, is 2 weeks at level 3 long enough to know whether we're getting ourselves back into trouble or we're doing okay?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. We're looking at that at the moment. It's actually it'll be pretty hard for us to tell, I think, unless level 3 is really bad. If level 3 is really not working for us and we see a quick resurgence, then we'll probably be able to call it by then. If level 3 is sort of middling or quite good, we may be still a little bit uncertain, but that's sort of a sign in itself. If we're still a little bit uncertain as to exactly how effective level 3 is, then we can perhaps be confident about shifting to level 2. But that's a big, level 2 is a big deal. It does reopen an awful lot of the economy, and and so we will have to be cautious when we go back to level 2. And again, avoid just sort of going crazy and heading to the beach, and just being cautious and keeping our physical distancing.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much. That is Professor Sean Hendy, who has been crunching the numbers all through this crisis. Horticulture New Zealand says it's asked the government for flexibility to allow more independent grocers and other food outlets to fully open at level 3. The lockdown has crippled produce supply to New Zealanders, despite supermarkets staying open, and many independent growers and grocers say their businesses might not survive the next few weeks. Indira Stewart reports.
Chief Executive of Horticulture New Zealand, Mike Chapman, says the COVID-19 crisis has stopped around 30% of fresh produce making it to retail shelves. While many smaller independent grocers once provided some competition to the big supermarkets, Mr Chapman says the lockdown has tipped the uneven playing field for produce growers even further.
Some growers are really busy supplying as much as they can to the supermarkets, and other growers are sitting there wondering should they plant because they've got nowhere to sell their vegetables.
Mr Chapman says the sector supported the need to keep New Zealanders safe during lockdown, but adds opening some smaller retailers in level 3 is crucial for the sector. He says growers still had to balance the responsibility to keep New Zealand's domestic fruit and veggie supply running, but many may not survive another few weeks. Horticulture New Zealand submitted a request to the government for the one-in, one-out policy to be available for more outlets. It also presented an operating procedure plan on how independent retailers could operate safely, but is yet to receive a response.
There aren't enough outlets to get the food out. Our suggestion is get as many outlets as you can safely open as possible. Under level 3, we're certainly saying perhaps there can be some more flexibility, and the Prime Minister's talked about click and collect and stuff like that, which we're fully supportive of, but we're hoping for just a little bit more flexibility to get as many outlets operating as possible.
Level 3 conditions will provide some relief to the sector, but it won't be enough. 77-year-old independent grocer Jack Lum stayed open when the country went into lockdown, but within hours his shop was closed down by police. He accepts the level 3 conditions, but says he was initially disappointed he couldn't open his shop.
It's one of those things that he can't do anything about. I've been at the shop for a few days tidying up, and we were getting phone calls all day virtually. When are you going to reopen? I said, at this stage I don't know. Pretty disappointed.
He says by the time the country reaches level 2, it may be too late for him.
I don't even feel like opening up now. You might as well give it up. Close it permanent. I've been there 50 years, so I'm heading near 80, so it's time to slow down anyway. This is probably a good time to do it.
Jack Lum says he hopes customers don't get too used to shopping at the big supermarkets and that they return to support independent grocers once the country reaches level 2. For Checkpoint, ko Indira Stewart tēnei.
Let's go to Otara now, where a team of locals have been working hard to get food and essentials out to some of the suburbs' most vulnerable residents. Every Thursday, the team gathers to fill large brown paper bags with items for senior citizens, food, shampoo, and even the odd sweet treat. They also do food drops to community leaders and hard-hit families. Our reporter Katie Doyle and camera operator Simon Rogers filed this report.
The COVID-19 lockdown has been hard on everyone, but none may be feeling the pressure more keenly than the people of Otara. Many here have lost their jobs, and some have struggled to claim a benefit. That's where Swanee Nelson and her team of locals come in. Since lockdown began, they've been hard at work, making essential care packages filled with bread, fruit, meat and vegetables for those who need it most.
Many were already struggling financially, so this has put a huge, massive magnifying glass on that situation, and it's made it even harder for them.
In the last 3 weeks, Auckland Council have received more than 13,500 requests for food assistance, with many of these coming from Otara. Mrs Nelson says her team is averaging about 120 requests a day from various members of the community struggling to put food on the table. Today's focus is on delivering hygiene products and treats for more than 100 senior citizens, some who have been worried about leaving their homes for fear of getting sick.
I mean, when we think of essential needs, people automatically have an assumption of what that is. But for some people, and when you're in isolation alone, which many of our seniors are, that essential need could actually be a treat that perks them up. So something that the other person may not consider a treat, like a freeze pop as an example.
Mrs. Nelson says it's impossible for her team to help everyone, but they are doing their best with the resources they have. For resident and volunteer Poto, the effort being made here is a testament to the spirit of Otara.
When you live in Otara and look at what's happening in here, it wasn't for the help of everyone here and the rest of the community that hopped in, mana foods and all that lot, and all the donations we were getting from the dairy. We go to the dairy. He give us a lot of kai, milk and all that. See, and that's what it is. But the longer we talk, we haven't got time. Later.
And with that, the team packs up their cars and depart to make deliveries. With gloves and masks, they go from house to house, checking in with residents like Pat Tucker and dropping off food on their doorsteps.
Well, it's absolutely marvellous. I mean, what they're giving us, I haven't had to go out. Like I've got a car, but I haven't had to go out. The people come around here, and when they came and give it, they all smile and walking like they are around like they are now, walking around the village and smiling at us and talking to us and bringing this stuff. It's absolutely marvellous. I've never had this happen to me before.
But the team say they are the ones who get the real joy, knowing that what they are doing is making a difference. Team member Scott Tulua says that has been a real blessing.
We had a lady that we dropped off to last week that she wasn't expecting anything from anyone, and she lives alone, so to see a big burly guy like me come to the door, she had no clue what was going on. She was shaking when she was opening the door, and she just saw the bags of food, and then just straight door came wide open, and it was massive. Praise the Lord, thank you, Lord. And she thanked us and said she blessed us for what we did.
And that, the team says, is what it's all about. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Air New Zealand axes its Auckland to Buenos Aires route for good. 2 people are injected with a COVID-19 vaccine that UK scientists say could be a game changer. And an Anzac Day like no other. We meet New Zealanders coming up with their own way to pay tribute tomorrow. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Should supermarkets continue paying staff a 10% bonus? And do you support the idea of a Trans-Tasman bubble? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now with Anna Thomas.
Thanks, Lisa. The government will offer more support to workers as the number of people applying for benefits climbs. Nearly 30,000 people have applied for the job seeker benefit since March the 20th. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says for people who have jobs but still can't go back to work, the Leave Support Scheme has been expanded to cover all businesses. The number of new cases of COVID-19 reported today remains low at 5, but a man in his 60s from Christchurch's Rosewood Rest Home has died, bringing the total number of deaths from the COVID-19 to 17. The Deputy Prime Minister says opening up a Trans-Tasman travel bubble with Australia could save some businesses. Restrictions across the Tasman have varied from state to state, and Winston Peters says any border relaxation could be kept just to those states with better health outcomes. He says he's working hard on a plan. Air New Zealand has confirmed its Auckland to Buenos Aires and Los Angeles to London routes will remain suspended due to COVID-19. The airline has also postponed the launch of its non-stop Auckland to New York service for at least 18 months, and it's expected to be years before travel to the US picks up again. People are being urged not to relax Level 4 restrictions over Anzac weekend ahead of the country's move to Level 3 at 1 minute to midnight on Monday. The police say they will keep enforcing Level 4 restrictions until then, with checkpoints operating at holiday hotspots. The Civil Aviation Authority will investigate a fatal plane crash near Carterton in Wairarapa this morning. The light top-dressing aircraft crashed into a gully shortly after takeoff, and the pilot, who was in his 50s, died at the scene. And Air New Zealand has donated more than 52,000 snacks to essential workers and charities rather than see them go to waste. The airline says its reduced flying schedule has meant an excess of 190 boxes of biscuits and 1 square meal bars. They've been given to police stations and hospitals, charities and social enterprises such as Eat My Lunch and Women's Refuge. Those are the headlines. It's 25 to 6.
Thanks, Anna, and welcome back. You're with Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business news now with Nona Peltier. Evening, Nona. Fonterra says demand is growing for dairy products in China, so what's the reason behind that?
Yeah, interesting. We had a conversation, I guess it was earlier this week, it seems, about A2 milk and how they have been doing really well by people buying infant formula products. And now this is something that's going on in China. So China's promoting dairy as a way of helping with immunity, and it's a healthy product, and they're promoting it for, young families, pregnant women, and the elderly. And so as a result of that, demand for dairies increased, and that's helped Fonterra's business in China. So, about a quarter of all of Fonterra's exports go to China. So good news for Fonterra.
And on the subject of food, agribusiness is pushing for a national food strategy. I mean, what is that and what's driving that?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting thing. So the Epidemic Response Committee heard from KPMG, that's a business advisory group. They heard from their global head of agribusiness, Ian Proudfoot, who has been working on this subject for many years. And he spoke as an expert to the committee. And one of the things he talked about was that New Zealand's we don't have a food strategy, but we should have one that will help farmers, processors, and distributors do better in the world, because there's going to be demand for different kinds of food products, with people globally looking for, again, what we just talked about in China, foods that have, high value, nutritional value, and so on, which New Zealand is very good at producing. Now, what he's saying is, though, that there needs to be some changes within our system to make this work. And a couple of the things, a few things he said was, number one is access to water in the right places at the right time. Good quality science. He said that we really need to have a conversation about what is good quality science. What do we need to do to address the many challenges, not just posed by climate change, but now with the pandemic? And then access to export markets. And this was really interesting. He's suggesting that we redeploy our NZ tourism organizations to go and tell the good story about New Zealand's food this time, not places to see, but our food. He's saying that we're great at telling stories about our country, and he said, who would be better placed than the people with the contacts overseas to do that?
Nona, can you take us on a quick trot around the markets?
Yes, indeed. So the market ended down 0.25%. That's 0.25%, 27 points down to 10,419. Our dollar was little changed as well at 59.9 US cents, 94.3 Australian, and 48.5 British pence. So everyone have a lovely weekend.
You too, Nona. Lovely to talk to you. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Air New Zealand is scrambling to cut costs as its flights to remain alive in a world where few are now flying. Despite hundreds of millions of dollars of government support, it's taking the scalpel to not only its hard-hit long-haul routes, but also to its ground-level operations. Plans to cut 100 jobs from its Nelson engineering base have shocked the region, and today the airline confirmed its services from LA to London and Auckland to Buenos Aires are now gone for good. The question on everyone's mind is, what might we be left with? Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
Air New Zealand's engineering base in Nelson has been the heart of the region's aviation cluster. But now that heart is about to be ripped out with the announcement this week the airline plans to move a large portion of that work to Christchurch. Nelson's Mayor Rachel Reese says it's a devastating blow.
There's probably over 400 Air New Zealanders in our region. They are part of our community, and for many of them, they're facing significant financial uncertainty and job losses. So it is absolutely devastating for an economy of this size and a community that's so tightly knit.
Up to 100 jobs are affected, although the airline says the option remains for some to be redeployed. The union has slammed the move, calling it cruel and unfair. Air2 aviation negotiations specialist Paul Graham says it's causing huge stress.
People are in lockdown, trying to look after their families, and Air New Zealand is trying to get these workers to make huge decisions about their future and trying to consult with them about this massive change.
Mr Graham says no one is denying the huge cash flow crisis the airline faces, but the moves to reduce workloads are opportunistic.
Predictions when you look forward are that the turboprop fleet, which is the fleet that's maintained in Nelson, will be the least affected fleet of all of them. So there is no reason that we can see why they need to do this now.
Air New Zealand wouldn't be interviewed, but Tauranga-based aviation commentator Peter Clark says Air New Zealand's regional fleet is the backbone of New Zealand aviation. He says while it's a huge shame for Nelson, the airline has to be pragmatic.
Funneling them all through Nelson was always a problem because you had to fly them there without passengers a lot of the time. Christchurch is probably logical and Auckland is logical. We need to build those bases and make them strong because that is our hub of Air New Zealand maintenance.
Air New Zealand also announced today it's postponing the start of a non-stop service to New York from Auckland, and it's confirmed it won't be resuming its suspended services from Auckland to Argentina and Los Angeles to London. Peter Clark says it's no real surprise, but it is disappointing.
And that's a sad moment, you know. Air New Zealand has been going to Europe for such a long time, and it's been a sort of a flagship route, that one from Auckland to LA to London. So that's a great shame.
He says despite the efforts made to get the Buenos Aires service up and running, it was up against Argentina's struggling economy. Mr Clark says the bigger concern is that the drawbridge has now been pulled up on travel to and from the lower part of South America.
There is a lot of Latino people working in New Zealand and have set up their home and their life here. So it's going to be a struggle for them in looking forward into the future.
Air New Zealand says it's deeply disappointing, but demand for international travel has been tracking at about 5% of pre-COVID-19 levels into June. It also says that despite the plans for the Nelson base, it will remain Air New Zealand's largest regional presence. But the city's mayor says it's critical that the government understands the impact of the changes on the region.
And as they look at support for the aviation sector, they do need to take a regional focus. We have other airlines that are also under pressure at the moment, and we know that in our region, air travel and air freight is critical to our connectivity. So I really encourage the government to engage with us at a regional level.
Air New Zealand is currently operating a limited international network to keep air links open for essential travel and cargo on key trade routes. It says resumption of services will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
2 volunteers have now been injected with a COVID-19 vaccine that scientists in the UK say could be a game changer. It's the first human trial in Europe of a potential vaccine, and more than 800 volunteers have been recruited by Oxford University. The BBC's Fergus Walsh has more.
This could change everything. A vaccine against coronavirus. A way out for all of us.
Okay, so I need a scratch.
The first volunteer to receive it was Elisa Granato, a microbiologist. She's 32 today.
I'm a scientist, so of course I want to try and support science, the scientific process, whenever I can. And since I don't study viruses, I felt a bit useless these days, so I felt like this is a very easy way for me to support the cause. Yeah, that's why I'm here, and I'm excited.
Half those on the trial will get the coronavirus vaccine, half a different jab. The volunteers don't know which one they've received.
I'm just basically going to sit here and incubate this thing and hopefully provide some good follow-up data, and then we'll see, and hopefully it works.
What would normally take years has been done in 3 months by scientists at Oxford University. Around 80 groups worldwide are developing coronavirus vaccines. A few others in the US and China have also started human trials. There's no guarantee any of them will succeed.
Personally, I'm very optimistic it's going to work. Formally, we are testing it in an efficacy study. There's absolutely no suggestion we're going to start using this vaccine in a wider population before we've demonstrated that it actually works and stops getting people infected with coronavirus.
So how does the vaccine work? Scientists have taken the genes for the spike protein on the surface of coronavirus and put them into a harmless virus. This forms the vaccine. After it's injected, the vaccine enters cells which start to produce the coronavirus spike protein. This prompts the immune system to produce antibodies and activate killer T cells, which should recognize the coronavirus in future and destroy it, preventing infection. The scientists will only know how effective the vaccine is if lots of volunteers are exposed to coronavirus.
Well, at this moment, we're chasing the end of this current epidemic wave. And of course, if we don't catch that, we won't be able to tell whether the vaccine works in the next few months. But we do expect that there will be more cases in the future because this virus hasn't gone away.
Why not simply infect people with coronavirus after they've had the vaccine? Then you'd know.
At this moment, it would be very difficult to do that with a disease which potentially has quite a high fatality. So I think if we reached a point where we had some treatments for the disease and we could guarantee the safety of volunteers, that would be a very good way of testing a vaccine.
The vaccine is stored in this freezer at minus 80 degrees. Rarely has a medical trial had so much riding on it for so many people.
Fergus Walsh reporting there. It is about 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is our address. Under lockdown, Auckland's air quality has reached the same level it was a century ago. Wildlife are flourishing and our water is cleaner. Besides air quality, how is the rest of nature coping? And will this new clean green stage actually last? Louise Tanuth reports.
Auckland has some of the cleanest air in the world right now, according to NIWA's air quality scientist Dr. Ian Longley. Traffic pollution has dropped 75% along the city's motorways and in Auckland's suburbs. In Queen Street, pollution's dropped more than 50%. NIWA's been tracking the air quality in our biggest city during lockdown. Dr. Longley says the remarkable result could reap benefits.
The last time we had air quality like this, I've no idea. You probably have to go back a century, something like that, so back to when we were all using trams and horses. So what we're hoping we will see in time is behind the scenes there's been a substantial improvement in public health happening.
Traffic is the main source of air pollution, and Dr. Longley says that could increase again as New Zealand's alert level drops.
I think there is a large degree of uncertainty of what our future traffic volumes will look like, but it seems certain that our air quality will match whatever happens to those traffic volumes. It might also mean that where our air pollution is worst might change.
The other problem is, with colder temperatures around the corner and more people, they will likely burn more fuel.
Although we're all exposed to less traffic pollution, the trade-off could be we're exposed to more smoke from home heating, which is equally as damaging to our health.
So while we're stuck in our bubble, the air quality's better and things are a little quieter. Animals are now flocking to where people are not. Here's Forest and Bird Regional Manager for Southland, Sue Maturin.
Sea lion pups playing in the estuary, they've been able to take over a road and they're quite happy sunbathing on the road. And at the Oamaru Little Blue Penguin Colony, the numbers of seals have doubled and they're just hanging about on the grass in the colony sunbathing.
But with people on lockdown, there's also no volunteers to keep up predator trapping efforts.
The colonies that are used to being defended by us all going out trapping remain unprotected. And so we're really worried when we get out there next week what we're going to find.
While there's been some environmental gain over a month of lockdown, water quality may not have changed much at all. Science and Innovations Manager for Horizons Regional Council, Abby Matthews, says they won't test again until we're at level 3.
You know, a lot of activities such as wastewater discharges and land use activities such as farming have continued. That said, there might be some, isolated circumstances where things have changed, such as industrial discharges may have ceased during that lockdown period. Generally, often water quality changes do take quite a time to sort of manifest in water and be seen.
Abby Matthews reckons the one thing that could alter water quality is fewer skiers this season due to travel restrictions.
Reduced tourism at our ski fields over the winter period, so that might see a reduction in pressure on our wastewater infrastructure in those areas, and that might be seen in water quality monitoring in time.
Lockdown has provided change for our environment, and many want it to stay. Greenpeace wants the government to adopt a green COVID response package, and 11,000 people have signed a petition urging Jacinda Ardern to consider it. It includes a $1 billion fund to help farmers shift to more climate-friendly land uses, a plan to electrify the rail network, and solarise hundreds of thousands of homes. The message from experts is if we want the environmental benefits to continue on long after lockdown's gone, then we need to think about slowing down a bit more. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tanuth aho.
The lockdown has been like nothing most of us have ever experienced. And while there have been huge challenges, many are relishing the time spent with whānau and the slower pace of life. For others, it's brought hardship and stress with a tough slog ahead. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and Nick Munro headed out to the Auckland suburb of Manurewa to see how people have found the past 4 weeks.
When the country ground to a halt just over a month ago, no one knew quite what to expect. Empty roads and shut-up businesses. Things have been quiet, but as Trevor Smith says, not always easy.
I was made redundant the day after. I said, oh, bum, I'm back on the benefit. And that's quite a big drop in income, It's only wages in New Zealand are pretty low as it is, and I went down about $280 a week straight away.
He's not alone in losing his job. Viva lives with her family in a 9-person bubble and has also been made redundant.
Just been laid off from work. I've just found out last week that I'm one of the 1,100 from where I work. My husband's his pay's been cut big time. And financially, I think it's okay because we're still able to buy food. I think once everything starts running, like payments and stuff for bills and that's going to be my biggest worry because my pay is what pays off our bills.
As well as the tens of thousands of workers to lose their jobs are those who have had their hours drastically cut. Christopher Linnell lives with his partner, 2 sons and 2 elderly family members, and they're relying on the government's wage subsidy at the moment.
Lockdown's been pretty hard. I was one of the ones that was stood down from work. My partner's still working, she works from home. My boy's studying at home. It's not easy. We're shopping day to day. Money's really tight, as everybody knows. Yes, I can't wait for it to end because I want to get back to work. I don't like being at home. Because you've got to think of the outcome. I've got elderly people at home. I've got to look after them first. Got to look after my kids, got to look after my son.
Janine Gorman is still working through the night at her mailing company job. She says she's incredibly fortunate to be there.
I'm one of the lucky ones that still has a full-time job and full pay. We hardly spent a lot of time with my son, but now with this, we spend every day, nearly every minute. My husband does it the nights, I do the mornings, which is really awesome. We're becoming a family, actually, to be honest.
And that sentiment around quality whānau time appears to have been one of the biggest takeaways of the lockdown.
The only thing we miss is probably going to Bunnings or, Briscoe's or something like that. But other than that, we're fine. I mean, you've got to understand the situation, and you've got to realise that sometimes you've got to do these things. So you just cope with it. The best bet is definitely spend more time with the wife.
Family time. Being a person who works all the time, it's been really good being home with family, catching up with family, getting to know what everyone's been up to and where the kids are at with school. Yeah, it's been good.
I'm finding it really good because you can bond better with the family and
Another good thing too is family that you haven't visited for quite a while that a lot of people take for granted. I'm missing that. So when the lockdown's over, I want to be visiting a lot of family.
Best bit of lockdown is, get to spend more time with the family.
And that quality time in our bubbles is set to continue until at least May 11, with people being urged not to get complacent as we push to eliminate COVID-19 from our communities.
Keep safe, wash your hands, wear gloves. But yeah, keep doing what you're doing. You're not going through this alone. Everyone's going through the same thing. So we're all in it together.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And if you were listening to that on your radio, Nita's piece will go up online so that you can see the video. Despite all Anzac Day services being cancelled due to COVID-19, Kiwis across the country are coming up with new ways to remember the lives of soldiers who died fighting for New Zealand. A nationwide service is being broadcast at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning here on RNZ as well as online. But as Logan Church and cameraman Dominic Thomas discovered, many are also planning their own way to pay tribute to the fallen, all from the safety of their bubble.
Standing alone at the end of his driveway in Palmerston North is Army Band reservist Tim Cook. On most Anzac days, he and his bugle are busy.
Anzac Day normally, for me, starts at Linton Camp, doing dawn service there, and I progress normally to the square in Palmerston North and do the civic service at 11, playing Last Post and Reveille again. I normally slip into a rest home and perform there quickly, and then head out to the Bridge of Remembrance in Eketahuna. So it's quite a long day. Their service is sort of 3 o'clock. So this is a very different day.
Very different, but for Tim, he's decided to keep some things the same this year. Tomorrow morning at dawn, Tim will put on his military uniform and instead of attending a service, he will march down his driveway and play.
Well, this weekend I'm very proud to still be able to play the Last Post in Reveille, albeit on my doorstep. And then it's time for thinking and remembering those who've gone before us, but also those essential workers at the moment.
His Parts the Bridgets will also read In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. All over New Zealand, people are being urged to stand at the end of their driveways or at their front door or anywhere in their bubble for a dawn service at 6 o'clock in the morning. The Last Post, Ode of Remembrance, the national anthems, and an address by Defence and Veterans Minister Ron Marks will also be broadcast on the radio and online at the same time. Down in Lower Hutt, just north of Wellington, Cub leader Steve Wank will be standing at the end of his driveway with his 2 kids, uniforms on. He's encouraged the other members of the First Waterloo Cub Pack to do the same.
So the whole group, we're encouraging our cubs to come out to a letterbox at 6 o'clock in the morning. Perhaps if Dad has a radio in his pocket with the dawn ceremony, and if they turn up and get a photo taken by their mum and dad, they'll get a badge, an Anzac badge.
His family have decorated their front fence with paper poppies. They've even cut up red New World shopping bags into poppy shapes to hang from the front gate. 10-year-old James has drawn a large poppy on paper and put it in their front window.
Oh, we did the poppies. We were remembering the soldiers that died.
For Steve, it's been important to keep his kids and the others in his group involved in Anzac Day. He ran a Zoom meeting for his cub group last night to teach them why we remember April the 25th.
It's important because, we're fighting a different type of war, obviously, and it's just a way of putting in context how important the past is, that we live in a country like we do, and that we have a lot to be thankful for.
The dawn service begins at 6 o'clock tomorrow here on RNZ National. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And that beautifully filmed piece will go up on our website. If you were just listening to it on the radio, it is worth watching back online. Time for some of your feedback before we go to the news at 6. Some of you getting in touch about the supermarket situation, and this is the 10% bonus that Countdown and New World supermarkets were paying to their workers while at level 4. It's going. Once they go to level 3, no more bonus payment. And this person, Marge, says, supermarkets supermarkets can surely afford to keep paying their workers 10% extra, given they've been the only groceries open and presumably have got more custom as a result. Obviously, they have had extra costs, but workers have done well and continue to do so. Another person's got in touch to say, hey guys, New Worlds are franchises. They can make their own wage decisions. Call one up and shame them. Thanks for your feedback. Interesting idea. Supermarket workers should be paid the living wage regardless of lockdown or no lockdown, says Gary. I think some are paid the living wage after they've been there a certain amount of time, but not everybody. And this one says it was made clear at the start the bonus for supermarket workers was temporary. We didn't hear any of them moaning about that fact then, so why are some of them moaning now? The temporary period is expiring as if it was a big surprise. They're lucky to have got something.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Ministry of Social Development says there are more people on the benefit now than there were during the global financial crisis. New figures show that in the 4 weeks since it was announced the country was going into lockdown, 33,000 more people have ended up on the benefit, most of them on job seeker support. That brings the total number to 335,000. Kay Reid from the Ministry says extra staff have been recruited and they're working 7 days a week to keep up with the groundswell of applications.
We're processing new applications for benefit within 5 working days. And the 5 working days is for 83% of those who apply. For hardship grants, 73% are being processed within 2 working days.
Kay Reid from the Ministry of Social Development. A COVID researcher believes it's not inconceivable that our borders with Australia could be reopened soon if both countries achieve elimination of the COVID-19 virus. Auckland University Professor Sean Hendy led the research team that modelled the worst case scenario for the virus. He says the first step is to get the number of infections down to just a handful for the next couple of months with no undetected spread. Professor Hendy has told Checkpoint reopening the border will have to be phased in slowly.
Perhaps having family members reconnected who've been separated across the Tasman by the lockdowns, and then maybe eventually looking to more widespread travel. But it's something we want to be cautious about, but certainly it's a possibility.
Sean Hendy says both countries would have to guard against a second wave of COVID-19, as Singapore has experienced. There's been a mixed reaction among the public to the end of a 10% pay bonus for supermarket staff. Countdown and Foodstuffs raised staff wages for the 4-week lockdown, meaning next week their pay will return to normal. First Union says the decision has left some workers feeling crushed because that extra 10% was the only thing keeping them afloat. But shoppers at the Glen Innes Pack and Save today have told Checkpoint ending the pay bonus is fair. One shopper, Duncan, says other essential workers have not received extra pay, with many taking cuts. He says others have lost their jobs entirely. The Broadcasting Minister has indicated the government may now back a merger bid by Stuff and NZME. The merger was previously rejected by the Commerce Commission and the Court of Appeal, and late last year Chris Fafui ruled out government intervention. However, he now suggests a commitment by NZME to maintain certain mastheads could pave the way for the deal. Mr Fafui says COVID-19 has accelerated already existing pressures on the media.
If that were to come back on the table, I'm trying to preempt the question, we'd have to look at what exactly the situation would be in front of us, because as is in most sectors, we need to be pragmatic in this COVID world that we're living in at the moment.
Chris Fafui says the government will consider competition and regulation in its second media support package. 3 South Sydney beaches that reopened this week have been temporarily shut again. The local council says lifeguards had to clear crowds shortly after lunchtime today when it became impossible to maintain safe social distancing. The council says people need to swim or surf and then go rather than hanging out in the shallows. Bondi Beach is set to reopen next week to swimmers and surfers. Court business will be one step closer to running as normal when the country moves to COVID-19 alert level 3 next week. Courthouses have been mostly closed during the lockdown, dealing only with priority proceedings involving vulnerable people or those in custody. Annika Smith reports.
Chief District Court Judge Hemi Tomonu says courts will be open to the public on Tuesday, but social distancing protocols mean only a limited number of people will be allowed in. Anyone attending court will also have to sign a contact tracing register. Judge Tomonu says everyone scheduled to appear in court during Level 3 will be required to attend in person, unless advised otherwise. Jury trials remain suspended until the end of July. Ko Annika Smith-Aho.
It's 6:04. The global head of women's football is promising to fight for funding as sports face tough financial decisions moving out of COVID-19. FIFA's chief women's football officer, New Zealander Sarai Berman, doesn't want women's football to get left behind as tournaments are rescheduled and funding sources change. Berman is adamant money assigned to women's football should remain rather than be reallocated to prop up men's competitions.
My main goal is to ensure that money, funding and resource that should be earmarked for women's football remains with the women's game, and that, it's not falling to the wayside, particularly as we come out of this situation.
Sarai Berman. The chairman of Rugby Australia is backing the organisation's departed chief executive, Raelene Castle. The New Zealander has resigned amid criticism of her handling of the national body's financial struggles have been compounded by the coronavirus. And Rugby Australia chairman Paul McLean says Castle made tough decisions during her tenure and copped vile criticism from faceless people. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning on Anzac Day, they were the eyes and the ears of the Pacific.
They were designated as native wireless operators.
Our first line of defence against a Japanese invasion.
The memory of war is absolutely critical to New Zealanders.
Fighting for a place in our national military history. Coast Watchers, Operation Pacific. With me, Mihingarangi Forbes, tomorrow morning after the 7 o'clock news on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Generally fine with some areas of morning fog tomorrow. Taranaki to Kapiti, also Taihape. Fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow and isolated showers about the ranges. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine, remaining showers about northern Gisborne clearing this evening. Buller and Westland mainly fine with isolated showers today, rain for a time tomorrow morning or afternoon. Otago and Southland, excluding Stewart Island, fine today. Periods of rain tomorrow morning with just a few spots for eastern Otago, then becoming fine from the afternoon. Stewart Island and Fiordland, isolated showers, rain developing tonight, then clearing late tomorrow morning and becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. RNZ National, it is 6:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's return to a story we have covered extensively this week. It concerns Air New Zealand and refunds for those customers who have booked flights to the United States. Our producer Bridget Burke has just got off the phone with Consumer New Zealand's Jessica Wilson, who says consumers should be covered by US Department of Transportation regulations.
In this situation, consumers are covered by US flight rules. These rules mean that if you're booked on a flight to the US, you are entitled to a refund if your flight's been cancelled. So that also applies to people who've booked through Air New Zealand on a flight to the US. If you're only offered a credit by the airline, you can request a refund. And Air New Zealand's Public Affairs Department has acknowledged it will provide refunds to these customers.
So you've managed to get confirmation from Air New Zealand that they commit to giving a refund if you've bought airfares to the US and your flight's been cancelled?
Yes, their Public Affairs Department has come back to us and said that while customers are being offered credits, they realise that under the US flight rules, these customers are entitled to refunds and they can opt for a refund where their flight's not going ahead anymore.
Now, do we know any information around rescheduled flights to the US?
Look, if the basic rule is if your flight's been cancelled, you can opt for a refund.
So even if they say we'll reschedule it the next day?
Even if the flight has been rescheduled for some point in the future, they don't have to accept that if they don't want to travel at that time. They can opt for a refund.
And that's Consumer New Zealand's Jessica Wilson speaking to our producer Bridget Burke a few minutes ago. So there you have it. Under US flight rules, if you've booked to the US and Air New Zealand has cancelled the flight, you do have a right to a refund. And Consumer New Zealand says that Air New Zealand has accepted that. And even if your flight has been rescheduled, you should be allowed to get a refund as well. No news on other destinations, though. We will keep on that for you. In the 4 weeks since the country's been in lockdown, 33,000 more people have ended up on the benefit. The Ministry of Social Development says the demand is higher than the peak of the global financial crisis, as the number of beneficiaries jumps to 335,000. And with Treasury predicting unemployment to rise, it's expecting even more people will be needing its help over the coming months. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
Wellingtonian Luke Abernethy never thought he would end up on a benefit. Up until just a few weeks ago, he had been living and working in London. But as airlines started cancelling flights and borders started closing because of COVID-19, he, like tens of thousands of other New Zealanders, decided to come home.
I've signed up to 2 recruitment agencies and applied for just one job. I'm just trying to keep my options open, but there's just nothing. In level 4, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. Like the recruitment agencies have both said that there's just no jobs. Maybe in level 3, stuff might sort of start coming up.
Until then, though, he's on the job seeker benefit.
Quite a lot of my friends ended up coming back, and all of them are in the same boat as me. And my sister and her boyfriend, obviously, as well, have gotten on it too. Just because, it's all we can do really at the moment.
In the 4 weeks since the lockdown was announced, the number of people receiving a benefit has jumped from 302,000 to more than 335,000, more than there ever was during the global financial crisis a decade ago. The increase includes almost 30,000 more people, like Luke Abernethy, on the job seeker benefit. Kay Reid from the Ministry of Social Development says many of those people have never needed help from work and income before.
So we are seeing a greater proportion of people than usual who have not previously been on a benefit. And we're also seeing a greater proportion for whom it's been more than 10 years since they've been on a benefit.
Kay Reid says MSD has been working 7 days a week to keep up with the groundswell of new applications. More staff have been recruited and call waiting times are now down to an average of 2 minutes.
We're processing new applications for benefit within 5 working days. And the 5 working days is for 83% of those who apply. For hardship grants, 73% are being processed within 2 working days.
As benefit numbers have grown, so too has the demand for food grants. Last week, MSD handed out more than 67,000 food grants, down from a peak of almost 70,000 a week earlier. To put that in context, back in February, MSD was handing out about 22,000 food grants each week. Solo mum Nadia was already on the benefit before the lockdown. She says the last few weeks have been tough with her 2 boys aged 2 and 3 at home. She says without the food grants she's been able to get, there would have been a much bigger strain on her budget.
Some days it may be colder, so the boys are going to be eating more and whatnot, and I just kind of found that we're just consuming so much more food than usual.
Food banks around the country are also seeing a massive spike in the number of people needing their help. Ronji Tanielu from the Salvation Army says it's been relentless.
It's like getting massive waves from the sea that just keep coming over and over again. I mean, in 1 week we gave out just under 6,000 food parcels, and that was about the second week of the lockdown. That's usually what the Salvation Army would give out in 1 month.
But the Salvation Army says the country cannot rely on food banks, as it has in the past, to support the growing numbers of people losing their income, housing and jobs because of COVID-19. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the government is doing what it can and pointed to the extra $30 million announced earlier this week to help civil defence and community groups provide more food parcels.
We will continue to work with those charities and we'll continue to make sure that there's provision of support both through our emergency services but also through the Ministry of Social Development.
Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Sarah Robson, aho.
New Zealand Rugby has praised the dedication of Raylene Castle, who last night resigned as the Chief Executive of Rugby Australia. The New Zealander had spent 2.5 years in the role. She was the first female boss of any of Australia's 4 major codes. But she's been subject to a year of unrelenting attacks, one rugby scribe says were just plain spiteful, focusing on both her gender and her nationality. New Zealand Rugby has now praised her character and says she took an unselfish look at what was best for the game in Australia. Raylene Castle leaves as major sports struggle to cope with COVID-19 restrictions. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald has more.
Just hours before her resignation, Raylene Castle was telling the ABC's 7:30 program she was getting on with the job.
At the end of the day, I've got a job to do that's focused on trying to do the best thing for Rugby Australia and make sure that we can get through this really difficult time. And the board and I are absolutely committed to do the hard yards.
However, in a statement provided shortly afterwards, she said it had been made clear to her she no longer had the confidence of the board and would stand down as CEO. Raylene Castle has come under sustained pressure in recent weeks. After revealing a more than $9 million operating deficit for 2019 and substantial losses predicted during the coronavirus shutdowns, she announced drastic cost-cutting measures. At the same time, the organisation has been unable to secure ongoing broadcast rights. Then came the letter from 11 former Wallabies captains demanding a change in leadership.
Rugby's in, to use the popular expression, deep shit.
Peter Fitzsimons is a journalist and columnist with 9 newspapers. He's also a former Australian rugby player. It's been a tumultuous week for Australian sport. Peter Fitzsimons says coronavirus can be blamed for the departure of Raylene Castle and NRL CEO Todd Greenberg, who announced he was quitting on Monday.
When you're running a business, which is the sports industry, which essentially stopped from a Wednesday night to a Thursday morning with, big revenue coming in to suddenly no revenue coming in, somebody's going to have to pay the piper. The problem is when there's no money to pay that piper, the piper has to go.
But it's clear problems existed before COVID-19. Aside from accusations of mismanagement, there was broad criticism of the Wallabies' woeful 2019 World Cup performance and, of course, the sacking of Israel Folau. Rugby Australia forced to reach a settlement with the star player after he launched an unfair dismissal claim when his contract was terminated for social media posts that stated gay people, among others, would go to hell.
The accusations that Raylene Castle blew it on Israel Folau are unfair. The truth of it is she took over as CEO of a sport that was in sad decline. For the last 20 years it's been in sad decline. What we'll write for her epitaph, the first thing we'll say is, very sadly, she couldn't arrest that decline. She took the slings and arrows of criticism and outrageous fortune with some dignity.
Peter Fitzsimons ending that report from Bridget Fitzgerald. And broken bubbles, breached family court orders and children who haven't seen their parents in weeks. That's how many families with shared childcare arrangements are describing their experience of the lockdown. They say the guidelines issued by the Family Court for the COVID-19 crisis are too broad and the shift to level 3 brings no relief. Indira Stewart has the story, but a note, all names in the story have been changed to protect the identity of the children involved.
When the Alert Level 4 conditions were announced last month, there was confusion among many parents. Hundreds flocked to social media support pages asking for clarity, and family lawyer Erin Eben says their office was immediately flooded with questions.
We started to receive phone calls very quickly after, on the Monday that it was announced we're going to level 4, we received a lot of calls. There was a lot of changing information as decisions were made, and I think that's only to be expected. So it was really tricky.
For many blended families, their one bubble already extended to at least 2 more bubbles, with several children in the home under shared childcare arrangements. But Ms Evans says the guidelines issued by the Family Court around shared childcare arrangements in lockdown are broad and only include 2 households sharing a bubble. It also says only children whose parents lived within an hour's drive of each other could continue their arrangements. That meant tough calls for thousands of parents in New Zealand.
Parents making a decision when the level 4 lockdown was announced about what they might do for the next 4 weeks. 4 weeks on, they might not be quite as willing to continue with the decision that was made.
That's something Tracy, her partner Todd, and their blended family of 5 children are now experiencing. Todd shares care of his 3 children with his ex-partner Judy. Tracy also shares care of her 2 children with her ex-partner, but due to the guidelines, her children have had to stay with her and Todd during the entire lockdown. Tracy says 4 weeks ago the lockdown started well with Todd's ex-partner Judy.
At the beginning we invited her into the house and said you can come over if you ever get lonely. She came over for my daughter's birthday. Yeah, we thought it was a good time to maybe build bridges.
But since then, Todd's ex-partner Judy has had her bubble broken multiple times. That means the risk for everyone who was connected to her bubble increased significantly. Tracy says the guidelines are so broad that having an extended bubble during the lockdown became too complicated. By week 3, she and Todd decided it was best to live separately.
It's huge because it's so time consuming, everything. Just processing the emotions, like it takes my time away from my children. Yeah, we worry about their mental health and we're worrying about his children's mental health and what's actually happening over there. So I am now moving out to my own place for the safety pretty much of myself and my children.
Some parents used the guidelines as an opportunity to unlawfully withhold children from their other parent, something family lawyer Ms Evans says she's seen a lot of during the lockdown. Peter says his ex-wife has breached their parenting order multiple times in the last 4 weeks. Both his children were recently tested for COVID-19 after they became ill. The results came back negative, but he says his ex-wife ignored doctors' advice for the children to isolate for 14 days at his house. He says he wished the family court guidelines were more specific around maintaining parenting orders during lockdown if they fit the level 4 restrictions.
It was a lot to take on, is making all those decisions suddenly like that for the government, but however, it's a very important part in everyone's life is their family. It impacts the kids severely, especially at a time like this where they're having a huge change, and it's another huge change in their short life.
His partner Jean says with the same conditions extending into level 3, they feel enforcing the court parenting order is almost impossible.
I guess in this time, referring to COVID-19, it's just whether or not that we'll get to see the kids. The children have been used as a pawn. It's more about control and possession over this time, even more so than it ever has been before.
Ms Evans says many affected parents are still confused over some of the conditions and agrees the family court's guidelines are broad, but she says it's difficult to have a perfect solution for everyone.
Part of the problem is you have many people who love a child and you have many people who a child loves, and families are complex. There isn't an easy answer, and unfortunately, sometimes that will cause some hardship or unfairness to a parent.
And it is 22 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some of you getting in touch about the news that Air New Zealand is bound by US Department of Transportation laws when it comes to refund. Consumer New Zealand has told us this evening that means that flights booked to the United States, doesn't matter where you live when you booked them, if they are cancelled, you should be given the opportunity to get a refund. Even rescheduled flights should be refunded. Consumer New Zealand is saying under this law, and they say that Air New Zealand has acknowledged that to them. Andrew's got in touch to say Air New Zealand surely knew this all along. Shame on them. I'm sure they knew about refund laws in other jurisdictions like Europe as well. Time will tell, says Andrew. And Max from Dunedin has got in touch too to say Air New Zealand has backed down on US flight refunds because Consumer New Zealand found a legal requirement. Presumably no refund for any other lost flights because of no equivalent requirement. Moral grounds clearly don't enter Air New Zealand's equation. Thanks for getting in touch. New Zealanders are buying up large on board games, home entertainment, education materials and alcohol, surprise, surprise. The number of us using the electronic payment service PayPal for our online shopping has doubled, and the things we used to buy are playing second fiddle to our lockdown essentials. Liz Lord is the Director of Consumer Behaviour at PayPal, and she's been tracking what we've been buying while cooped up at home.
Since the lockdown, we at PayPal have noticed changes in certain categories in New Zealand, and those include groceries, meal deliveries, subscription services, educational tools and content, home entertainment, home improvements and DIY, and all things relating to exercising at home. And not forgetting, of course, alcohol deliveries, which have also increased in usage as well.
So what would normally be the top spend areas? We're just wondering how we've changed in our habits.
Yeah, so traditionally, some of the larger categories would have been fashion, clothing, travel and entertainment, cinemas. And of course, those categories, as people are spending much more time at home, have tended to drop down.
So obviously during a pandemic, potential for boredom, an epidemic of boredom. So some of the things that you've listed there are ways to distract ourselves or continue education. Specifically, are we tapping into anything in particular?
Yes, so we've really seen a big trend towards entertainment for the family at home. And those are in two ways. More traditional entertainment methods. So our business customers have told us there's been a run on jigsaw puzzles, board games, arts and crafts, but of course also in the kind of more tech space of home gaming, etc. has also risen. In addition, we can see, home exercise is a really big change. So as gyms close, there's obviously the need for adults and children alike to get their energy out at home. And so we've seen big changes in exercise equipment and subscriptions for adults. But in addition, not forgetting children, where we've seen changes in trampolines and swing sets and toys that keep the kids active.
Wow, those are some big ticket items to be waiting to be delivered to your house.
Yes, that's right. Well, I know certainly the prospect for me of two small boys in the house for an indefinite period prompted me to go and grab a trampoline to pop in the garden to keep them busy. So, and obviously other people are in the same mindset.
Yeah, and I don't know about the old board games because we call them bubbles here when you're confined to your bubble. It could end in, another world war, Monopoly, where I live.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. But I think as well what we've seen is, parents are, they're also, as they're confined within their four walls, they're looking at things that they may have not got around to doing, of jobs or renovations, and they're taking the time to kind of clean out the rooms that they may not have done before, or do some renovations, or get their home office up to scratch if they're spending much more time at home. So we've also seen a big change in those categories too.
In New Zealand, we're going to be going to level 3 next week, and that still means no face-to-face retail. So all transactions have to be non-contact. So have you seen a bit of a rush on to get on the likes of PayPal?
Yeah, absolutely. In recent days, new sign-ups to PayPal globally have risen to almost double what the pre-pandemic norm was. And whilst we can only see our base and what our consumers are doing, it does obviously indicate that there's more people than ever using online shopping as a way forward.
And finally for tonight, the first time since 1915, there won't be any public gatherings tomorrow to mark Anzac Day. But we're being asked as a nation during this lockdown to mark Anzac Day by standing at dawn tomorrow in our doorways, in our driveways or out our letterboxes at 6 a.m. to remember those who fought and those who lost their lives. To finish the show tonight, we're going back to Palmerston North to New Zealand Army Band reservist Tim Cook, playing the last post at the end of his driveway. Stay safe this weekend in Level 4 lockdown. Checkpoint will be back on Tuesday.
RNZ News at 6:30. I'm Anna Thomas. The Social Development Ministry has recruited extra staff and is working 7 days to keep up with the record numbers applying for the dole and hardship grants. Consumer Advice says Air New Zealand must refund customers who brought fares to the US where flights have been cancelled. A COVID-19 researcher says with fewer than 10 cases recorded over each of the past 6 days, it's possible New Zealand could declare the virus eliminated in just a few weeks. Courts will reopen next week with social distancing protocols, which will limit the number of people allowed in. Jury trials will not start again until late July. And the Broadcasting Minister says the government may now back a previously rejected bid to merge the media company Stuff and NZME. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, all the talk's been about health and the economy. Lauren Taylor's running a campaign to keep art front and centre in our lives. The Dunedin Sound goes symphonic on Friday.